So if you're like me, with your less nice pipes, maybe not your Savs, your Petersons, your Castellos, you're probably going to want to tinker with them and try to make them just perfect. So I want to show you how you can actually take a stem that you don't really like the shape of and shave it down to something that you do like. And you actually don't need anything more than just sandpaper to do it. And if you have a polishing or buffing wheel, which is really cheap, you can actually just buff it and polish it so it looks really, relatively good. Something that's close to a renewed or restored estate pipe quality. So with this pipe stem, it's kind of an example of what I do like. It's a really flat stem. It's almost like having a tiny knife blade in your mouth. And it's so thin that my mouth can just stay shut without having to tighten my mouth around it or anything. Of course, there's some downsides, like if there's a lot of chatter, just tons of chatter on here over time, it'll wear a hole in it. But I have tons of pipes, so I'm not someone who heavily is smoking pipe all the time. And these estate pipes where you see holes and stuff worn inside of them, it was obviously someone who smoked a pipe a lot and it was like their only pipe. So obviously we live in the future, we live in a time when we don't have that kind of an issue. So all I do, what I've been doing really with my like cheaper pipe stems, and I'm gonna have another video I'm gonna upload here where it actually shows me working on it. What sucks about this video is it's gonna be like me just having horrible camera angles and horrible audio quality. So this video is a lot more like a podcast where you can just listen to it and I can explain to you the process. But of course, a lot of this like how to deal with pipe stems, etc. The information just comes from Bear Pipe, BAREPIPE. I don't even know what the guy's name is, but he puts out videos where he just goes through and he does his pipe restoration projects and he shows you step by step what to do. And so hopefully I'm not missing some information, but I've just never seen a video of him editing a mouthpiece, so hopefully this is something that'll actually be helpful. So you have this ebonite / vulcanite, this rubber type mouthpiece, and then you have this acrylic style mouthpiece, plastic, acrylic, etc. Even a plastic like a Missouri Meerschaum mouthpiece I've been able to do this on. So it doesn't really seem to be that the material matters all that much. Maybe bone would be a little different, or I don't know, probably you're not going to be editing or changing your amber mouthpieces. And finally, what I sometimes like to do with my pipes is I like to add a bit of a bend to it. And obviously you look online, you'll see lots of people adding bends to their pipe stems, and there's probably going to be a better video out there. But I personally do the exact same thing on some of my stems, and the video that I'm going to be posting up here in a bit, where I put a little bit of bend on a mouthpiece that I found, an estate mouthpiece. It's an estate mouthpiece that was on a Missouri Meerschaum Ozark hardwood pipe originally, and that hardwood pipe had been completely destroyed, but it had a nice, an okay old vulcanite stem. And I prefer the old vulcanite because it's really soft, and it's soft on my teeth. Older vulcanite, cheaper vulcanite has a lot more sulfur content. The sulfur content is what makes it a lot softer, not as hard. And to most people that's a downside, that's not good. But to me, that means that I can pretty easily sand it down and shape it to the exact shape that I want, whilst also buffing it and just shining it, putting a carnauba wax on it, and it gives it that like nice finish that I really want, that shiny finish, and it's still comfortable. It's cheap, I don't have to pay much for it because it's an estate that I found basically. So all I have to do with the sandpaper is I take the sandpaper and I put it on a flat surface that has a bit of a lip on it, something like that, and I take the mouthpiece and I go back and forth on it. So if I want to shave down this lip, if it's a little bit thicker, if I want to shave it down, and I go back and forth like this, and I can shave it down really easily. That process is actually oddly easy to do, and it's oddly, you can't really go wrong with it that much. Vulcanite and acrylic is relatively forgiving materials. You just go like this a little bit, check at it, see how it's going, back and forth. It's pretty simple. And what usually happens is as you're shaving it down, the button it's getting more pronounced. I personally prefer a more pronounced button because a button piece catches it on your teeth, or catches your pipe on your teeth, so the pipe doesn't fall out of your mouth. And I've noticed that process is really good. Doing that's really good. I always prefer more of a button, but if somebody doesn't want a button, they can do the same thing and just purposely like sand the button off. So you take a very square edge and you do that for thinning out the stem portion. If I want to thin out the button, I would just put it on a flat surface and just go like that. And of course, what I like to do also is I like to thin out the this part of the, I don't know what you call it, it's the flared out end of the fishtail shape of the pipe. I usually like to make that smaller too, so I have a much smaller bite zone. If I have just a smaller bite zone that's kind of squared off at the top, it's kind of ideal to me. I prefer the bite zone to be almost a complete square and have no rounding whatsoever. If I wanted to round it off, I'd obviously do a bit of this motion, rocking it back and forth as I'm sanding it. But I'm sanding it at like 300 grit, probably 300, 200 grit to just get off all of the material that I don't want. And of course I'm going kind of like this in a circular pattern to try to round off any edges. And I'm doing it kind of lightly. And so I'm being kind of careful and really making sure to look at it really carefully under a light. And once that's all good to go, then I start going down to the higher, more smoother grits. So I'll do the same thing on a 400 grit, 600 grit, 1000 grit, etc. These higher grit numbers as I'm just doing this. And then I reach a point where the sandpaper is no longer necessary and I start getting into the same, I get to like a 600 grit, which is the first grit of the micro mesh pads. Start doing the exact same thing with the micro mesh pads. So I go over everything on the flat surface. I'm using the mouthpiece and moving the mouthpiece around. It's a lot more efficient than taking the grit sandpaper and putting it on the mouthpiece like this. This is kind of an inefficient process. And as I'm doing that, little by little, I'm always checking it under really bright light to make sure it's all good to go. Little by little, it gets smoother and smoother. And then I reach a point where it's very smooth, and now just very smooth. It's almost as smooth as the original mouthpiece smoothness. At that point, I might go over the whole thing like this finally. I'm going to take it off the table and actually use the micro mesh pads on everything. I'm trying to make sure everything has the same grit. The finish has the same grit, sanding throughout. And then finally, you reach a point where you have the highest grit of the micro mesh pad. And by then you can finally look at it and see, is this okay? You can always go back and re-sand stuff if you need to, but it's nice to kind of stop after every grit, take a look and make sure everything's completely sanded down to the same grit. And then after that, I go on my buffing wheel. I have the jewelry buffer. It's something I bought on Amazon. If you go on Amazon, you can buy these return products. They call it warehouse deals. And there's a lot of these different tiny jewelry buffers that have these cloth buffing pads on them. I take off the stitching of the cloth buffing pad. You can watch Bear Pipe's videos on this. Just search Bear Pipe on YouTube in buffing or polishing a pipe. He shows how he uses his machine. But Amazon is very cheap, almost like $70 for a brand new buffing polishing wheel. Usually it's called a jewelry polisher or jewelry buffer. And you can use that and kind of test that around. But that's the thing that I use today, or nowadays. I use that all the time, basically. I use a white diamond buffing compound, which actually a block of it did come with the machine. I kind of bought my own block anyway. And then the Carnauba wax, for whatever reason, is not available on Amazon. Can't find it anywhere. Carnauba wax I found on eBay, little blocks of it. It was pretty cheap, it was like $10. They have quite a few of those things available on eBay, of course. If you can't find it on one place, find it on the other. And the little polishing wheel I was able to find for $40 as a warehouse deal on Amazon. You can always return this stuff, which is nice. And for the price of a pipe, the sandpaper, buffing wheel, the compound, pretty much all the stuff that I needed. Obviously protective glasses, because as you're buffing this stuff, oftentimes these things jump out and they might get you in the eye or something. Pretty scary, so obviously protective goggles. All that stuff costs about the price of one pipe, and you get just tons of tinkering fun. You're able to change the shape of these stems. So obviously check out this video of me working on, actually working on the pipe stem, changing its shape from, I don't know what you call it, it's almost like a slight fishtail into something that's more straight and even smaller bite zone than before. Very flat bite zone versus a rounded bite zone. And they'll kind of give you a little different idea. I just noticed that people don't talk about this. I haven't really seen anyone on pipe forums talk about, oh, I hate how the bite zone is. I wish it was flatter so that way my teeth can actually set on it and grip on it much better. What I don't like is when I move my head like this, sometimes the pipe will tilt around. Notice that if the bite zone is very rounded, that always happens. And if the button isn't pronounced enough, then if my pipe is moving around like this, as I turn my head, it'll slip out and it'll pop out of my mouth sometimes. That's kind of annoying. And of course, if the bite zone is too wide, then it pulls on my lip a little bit, and it's kind of annoying. And of course, if it's too thick, like the blade edge basically is too thick, it's also annoying to me. So I'm able to kind of fix all those problems with the pipe stem that usually I would just throw away, or I would sell basically, or get rid of, or give away to a friend. and I can still just modify it and turn it into like this perfect stem basically. So I can be my own little, I don't know, garage pipe mouthpiece maker basically for the price of a pipe. You know, it's almost under $100 that I spent on all these little tools. The sandpaper is really cheap, the micro mesh pads are really cheap. Interesting stuff. All right.